Snow hammered the train windows so hard it sounded like gravel flung by an angry hand. The car swayed, metal shrieking against the rails, as if the locomotive were fighting to stay upright. Inside, lanterns rattled, passengers clung to their armrests, and Nora Wren jolted awake with a gasp, her breath catching, as the train lurched violently into a bank of wind roaring down from the high Rockies. Her heart thudded. For a split second she couldn't tell whether the shaking came from the storm or from the panic clawing its way up her chest. She hugged her carpetbag, trying to steady her breathing as the train shuddered again, harder this time. Someone shouted down the aisle, "Hold on, we're hitting the pass!" But it wasn't the storm that frightened Nora. It was the dream she'd been having again, the same nightmare of a table she wasn't welcome at, of chairs scraped away from her, of voices whispering too big, too slow, too much. The same dream of being unwanted. She blinked away the last fragments of sleep, trying to calm her pulse. She had overslept. She never overslept. Then a shadow fell over her. "Ma'am, you need to get off now. This is Flat Top." The conductor's voice cut clean through her. Nora jerked upright. "What? No, no. Pine Hollow. I'm going to Pine Hollow." Her voice trembled. The storm outside didn't scare her half as much as the thought of missing her stop. The conductor had no patience for trouble. He tilted his cap back, irritation stiffening his jaw. "Lady, Pine Hollow was 20 minutes ago. You were out cold. This here's the last stop till after Christmas." Her mouth went dry. "It can't be. I'm supposed to start work tonight. They're expecting me." "Then you should have stayed awake," he snapped, already turning down the aisle. "Grab your things. Doors are open." The words struck like a physical blow. Nora stumbled to her feet, clutching her carpetbag to her chest, as the train screeched against the icy rail bed. Panic swirled up again, thick and hot, drowning out the cold air seeping into the car. Through the fogged glass, she saw nothing but white. A swirling wall of snow. A platform barely lit by a single lantern flickering in the wind. Flat Top, she thought. She'd heard the name whispered on the train. A mountain town barely clinging to existence. Hunters, trappers, miners, harsh people in harsher land. Not Pine Hollow, not opportunity, just nowhere. The train groaned to a stop. The doors opened and a blast of brutal mountain wind punched her square in the chest, knocking her breath into a cloud of white vapor. The conductor ushered her out with a firm shove. The moment her boots hit the platform, the cold swallowed her whole. It wasn't ordinary cold. It was the kind that burned. The kind that warned you one wrong step could end your life. Nora staggered, snow already gathering on her coat sleeves. Behind her, the conductor shouted something she couldn't hear through the wind. Then the whistle screamed. The wheels bit into the rail, and the train vanished into the blizzard like a dark animal slipping into the trees. Gone. Her one way forward, gone. Nora stood frozen as the platform emptied. Families hurried to wagons waiting with lanterns glowing like trembling stars in the storm. Laughter echoed. Boots thudded on wood. No one looked at her twice. A large woman standing alone in the snow wasn't worth anyone's time. Not here. Her stomach rolled with dread. Pine Hollow wasn't walking distance. Nothing was walking distance in winter this deep. The Harrington family would think she had abandoned her post, might even report her. She had no money for lodging. No money for food. No friends on this side of the mountains. The wind howled around her like something alive, something hungry. She forced herself toward the station door, boots slipping on ice. Inside, the tiny room smelled of wet wool and smoke. A stove glowed weakly in the corner, but no one moved aside to let her closer. The station master sat behind a small window writing in a ledger. He didn't look up. Sir Hora stepped closer. "Is there another train coming through tonight?" "Anything heading toward Pine Hollow, no trains," he muttered, flipping a page. "Not even a freight line, a supply caboose." He finally raised his eyes, and they swept over her slow, cold, judgmental. He took in her round cheeks, her broad shoulders, the stress sweat darkening her collar, despite the cold. "Lady, even if there was a train, they wouldn't stop for weather like this. Next one's after Christmas." "But I got off at the wrong station," she whispered, voice quivering. "I didn't mean to. I have to get there. Please." He looked right through her. It hurt more than if he'd shouted. "No rooms left in town either," he added flatly. "Storm's got hunters stuck here from the high ridge. You're out of luck." Her throat closed. She backed away from the window, blinking hard. She refused to cry in front of these people. She would not give them that satisfaction. When she stepped outside again, the platform was empty. She sat on a bench near the wall, hugging her carpet bag, snow landing on her lashes. It melted into cold streaks down her cheeks. Maybe tears. Maybe not. She couldn't tell. She whispered to the night, Lord, I don't know what to do." Her breath turned to mist and vanished. Flat Top offered no answers. Only wind. Only cold. Only silence. For a long time she sat alone, watching the snow pile at her boots, feeling the numb creep up her fingers. The storm deepened. Lanterns went dark. She felt small, smaller than she had ever felt, and at the same time painfully aware of her size, as if the world saw nothing in her except what it mocked. Then, ma'am, a deep voice. Steady, not unkind. Nora snapped her head up. A figure stood before her, tall and broad, wrapped in fur and leather. Snow clung to the wild thickness of his beard. His boots were made for mountains, not streets. A hunter's axe hung at his hip. A mountain man. Half shadow, half myth. He crouched slowly, meeting her eyes beneath the swirl of snow. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. His voice carried something the others lacked, not pity but recognition. Flat Top's no place for that. Nora opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The man straightened, glancing at her bag, then at her reddened hands. "You got somewhere to stay?" he asked. She shook her head. "Then you'll freeze," he said. "And I don't plan to stand here watching that happen." A gust of wind roared between them. He held out a gloved hand. "My cabin's a few miles out," he said. "You come with me." Nora stared at the hand at the storm at the platform where the last train had vanished. The snow didn't let up. They walked in silence, the wind howling like a living thing across the ridge, biting through layers of wool and leather. Nora couldn't feel her toes after the first mile. Her thighs ached from pushing through drifts almost to her knees. She kept her head down, following the man's wide steps and the rhythmic crunch of his boots through the crust. Her carpetbag dug into her shoulder, numb fingers barely able to hold it anymore. She didn't know his name. He hadn't offered it, and she hadn't asked. Truth be told, Nora wasn't sure if she'd lost her mind, accepting a stranger's invitation to follow him into the woods. But every instinct in her body said that sitting on that bench would have meant freezing to death before morning. That hand he offered wasn't just shelter. It was survival. The man stopped without warning, raised a gloved hand, and listened. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, faint but close enough to lift the hairs on Nora's neck. He turned his head slightly. "Keep walking. They're not hungry enough to come near us tonight." His voice was low, worn like a trail knife, but calm, solid. She nodded, unable to answer. Her teeth had started to chatter. Finally, after what felt like hours, a clearing opened in the trees. A small cabin crouched against the slope, its roof buried beneath a thick coat of snow. The windows glowed with faint orange light, not bright, just enough to say someone lives here. He stepped up to the door and pushed it open without knocking. Inside, he said. Nora hesitated just long enough to gather what remained of her strength. Then she ducked in, blinking through the sudden shift from cold white to fire-warm shadows. The heat hit her like a punch. The scent of pine smoke leather and something earthy filled her nose. The man closed the door behind them. Then, only then, he turned to face her fully. "Hang your coat there," he said, nodding to a hook near the hearth. "Boots, too. If they thaw too fast on your feet, you'll blister." She obeyed, awkwardly fumbling with frozen buttons. Her fingers were swollen and red. He said nothing, just walked over to the fire and stirred the embers back to life, adding 2 thick logs from a stack by the wall. When she finally turned to get her first real look at the place, she was struck by its starkness. The cabin was a single large room, rough-hewn but sturdy. A wooden table and 2 mismatched chairs. A stove in one corner. A cot along the far wall. No decorations. No garlands. Not even a scrap of red to say it was Christmas Eve. That's when she noticed her. A little girl sat by the far window, knees tucked to her chest, eyes locked on the snow swirling outside. Her long dark hair was braided down her back. Her face, pale, solemn, turned only slightly toward Nora, and even that took effort. Nora's breath caught. The man followed her gaze. "She doesn't talk much," he said, setting a pot of water on the stove. Nora cleared her throat, her voice hoarse. "Your daughter." He nodded once. "Tala." Nora stepped forward a little. "Hi, Tala." No response. Just the hiss of wind outside and the crackle of wood catching flame. The man didn't offer more. He pulled a few dried strips of meat and potatoes from a shelf, began slicing them with a hunting knife right on the table. Nora turned to him. "Thank you for bringing me in." He shrugged. "Wasn't gonna let you die on a bench." She tried to smile. "Still, thank you." He paused, then said, "Name's Malachai. Malachai Red Elk. I'm Nora. Nora Wren." They stood like that for a beat. Stranger and stranger. Words hung between them, unspoken, heavy as the snow weighing down the cabin's roof. Then finally, Malachai said, "Sit by the fire. Warm your hands." She didn't argue. As the warmth seeped into her limbs, her body ached with relief. She fought the sting of tears. She hadn't felt safe in weeks, maybe longer. From the corner, Tala turned her head slightly, watching. Nora glanced at her, then looked away, not wanting to spook her. Silence had a language of its own. Dinner was simple: boiled potatoes, dried elk meat, and flatbread warmed on the stovetop. Malachi ate quietly. Tala picked at hers. Nora forced herself to eat, though her stomach was twisted in knots. After the dishes were stacked, Malachi returned to the fire, resting his elbows on his knees. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Pine Hollow," Nora replied softly. "I was supposed to start work for a family there. The Harringtons. I missed the stop. Lot of folks miss things out here." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" He met her gaze, serious and level. "It means people don't come back from Flat Top. You either survive the mountain, or it takes you. That's how Flat Top works." The words landed heavy. Nora didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. He stood and grabbed a thick wool blanket from a trunk. "You can take the cot tonight. I'll sleep by the fire." "No," she said quickly. "That's not fair. I can sleep on the floor." "You'll take the cot," he said without raising his voice. But there was no room for argument in it. She nodded. The room went still again, the kind of quiet only deep winter can bring. Nora slipped under the blanket, letting the heat of the fire slowly thaw the fear from her bones. She heard Tala settle on a small pile of quilts near the window. Malachi sat cross-legged by the hearth, sharpening his knife with long, steady strokes. Nora watched the shadows on the wall, feeling the weight of the journey finally crash down over her. Every muscle ached. Her mind spun with what-ifs. She'd meant to build a life in Pine Hollow, earn money, prove she could be more than what people saw. Instead, she was in a stranger's cabin halfway up a mountain on the wrong side of every plan. And yet, she felt safer here than she had in a long time. As her eyelids began to fall, a soft shuffle pulled her back. She turned her head. Tala had crept closer, not too near, but near enough that Nora could see her small hands holding onto the edge of the quilt. She didn't say a word, but her eyes, dark and solemn, held something Nora hadn't seen in a long time. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity and maybe the faintest hope. Nora offered a gentle smile. "Good night, Tala," she whispered. The little girl didn't reply, but she didn't walk away either. Nora's heart tugged in her chest. She closed her eyes, the sounds of the fire soft against the wind. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, three strangers shared one roof, and whether they knew it or not, something had already begun to change. Tomorrow, Nora would hum a song her mother used to sing, and someone in that cabin would hum it back. The sky outside had turned a dull, pewter gray by the time Nora stirred beneath the quilt. For a few seconds, she didn't remember where she was. The scent of pine smoke, the rough texture of wool beneath her fingers, the steady pop and crackle of the fire, none of it belonged to the rented boarding room she had dreamed about in Pine Hollow. Then the memory hit sharp and cold as the wind from the night before. Flat Top, the wrong stop, the mountain man, the silent girl. She sat up slowly, every joint aching, like she'd been through a battle. Across the room, Malachi sat by the fire sharpening a small blade. He didn't look at her right away, but he knew she was awake. Tala wasn't in sight. Nora scanned the room, heart quickening, but relaxed when she spotted the child sitting by the far window again. Still in that same small knot of silence, back straight, legs folded, hair draped over one shoulder. Nora stretched carefully, brushing back her hair and trying to smooth her rumpled skirts. Her belly growled, and she realized how little she'd eaten yesterday, how much she'd lived on nerves and snow. Malachi set the blade down and finally looked up. "Coffee's warm on the stove. Help yourself." "Thank you," she said, quietly rising. Her legs tingled with returning blood as she moved toward the chipped enamel pot, poured a tin cup full, and took a cautious sip. It was bitter strong enough to wake the dead, but she welcomed it like a friend. "Sleep okay?" he asked. "I did." She hesitated. "Better than I expected." He gave a soft grunt, almost amused, and stood. "I'll be heading to the lower traps soon. Storm knocked a tree over the trail last night. Need to clear it before it freezes solid." She turned toward him. "Can I help you ever swung an axe, not unless you count splitting logs in boarding school?" He raised a brow, not mocking, just surprised. "Figured I might be more useful if I helped out." "You want useful," he said, grabbing his coat. "Keep that fire going. Make sure she eats something." His eyes flicked toward Tala. Then, as if he felt the weight of her hesitation, he added, She won't talk, but she listens. Just don't push. Nora nodded, understood. He left without another word. The door shut behind him with a gust of wind. For a long while, the cabin settled into quiet. The kind that wasn't heavy, just expectant. Nora moved slowly around the room, tending the fire, setting out what food she could find: half a loaf of hard bread, dried apple slices, a bit of smoked meat. She managed to soften with hot water and salt. She worked with care, humming under her breath. She wasn't thinking of Tala at first. She was thinking of her mother, how she used to sing when she cooked. Soft old Irish hymns and lullabies that smelled like cloves and warm bread. Before she even realized, Nora found herself humming one now. A simple tune. Nothing grand. Just something that felt like home. Down in the valley, so low. She didn't sing the words, just the melody. And behind her, a soft sound. A chair creaked, then a footstep. She turned her head. Tala had moved. The girl now stood in the middle of the room, bare feet quiet on the wood floor, watching Nora with wide, unreadable eyes. Nora didn't stop humming. She smiled just barely and turned back to the food, letting the song wrap around them like smoke. Tala sat slowly on the floor, beside the stove, pulling her knees to her chest. Still watching. Still silent. But closer. Nora's chest ached in a way she couldn't explain. She ladled warm broth into a tin bowl, placed it gently on the floor within reach, then backed away without a word. Tala waited a moment, then reached. That was enough. Later they sat in silence by the fire. Nora stitched a torn pocket in her skirt. Tala fiddled with a strip of old cloth, folding it, unfolding it, folding again. It was the first time the cabin didn't feel like a stranger's house. When Malachi returned, snow-dusted and weary, he paused in the doorway. Tala was still sitting beside Nora. He said nothing, just nodded once and began taking off his coat. Nora stood and began fixing supper without being asked. She felt the shift. Small, quiet, but real. That night, after they ate and cleaned up, Nora moved to the shelf above the hearth. She found a stub of candle tucked behind an old tin. It was bent, misshapen, but it would still burn. She lit it carefully, then walked to the front window. "What are you doing?" Malachi asked, voice low behind her. She set the candle down and watched its light shimmer against the frost-glazed glass. "My mama used to light a candle every Christmas Eve," she said. "Said it was for travelers. People who were lost so they'd know someone was waiting." Malachi's silence stretched behind her like a canyon. But in the corner of her eye she saw Tala glance toward the flame. Just for a second. And that was enough. Malachi spoke again, but his voice was softer now. Rough with something else. "We don't do Christmas here. Not anymore." Nora turned, facing him fully. "I understand," she said, "but I needed to." He held her gaze, then looked away. She went to bed without pressing further. There was a boundary in his silence she hadn't yet earned the right to cross. But when the fire burned low and shadows crept across the walls, she felt warmth near her side. Tala had moved again, this time closer to Nora's cot, her doll tucked under one arm, her other hand barely touching the edge of the quilt. Nora didn't speak. She just reached down, rested her hand gently on Tala's head. The child didn't move away. Tomorrow they'd go into town. Supplies were low. And maybe, just maybe, it was time someone else saw that Nora wasn't as weak or foolish as she looked. Because in this cabin she had started something. And she wasn't going to let the cold take it away. The next morning came without sun. A pale gray light seeped through the windows like cold milk, heavy with more snow on the way. Malachi stood at the door, adjusting his rifle strap across his back, eyes scanning the sky the way mountain men did reading clouds like scripture. "Storms shifting east," he muttered. "We've got maybe half a day before it drops again." Nora stood near the stove, buttoning her coat. "Then we should go now." He looked at her. "You sure we need supplies?" she said, chin high. "You're nearly out of salt, we're low on beans, and the only coffee left smells like shoe leather." That drew a huff of something like a laugh from him. Barely. But it was there. Tala stood behind Nora, clutching her doll already wrapped in a wool shawl. Her boots scuffed the floor in tiny half-steps. Not ready, but not refusing either. Malachi finally gave a small nod. "We'll take the sled. Easier than the trail." Nora didn't know what she expected Flat Top's town center to look like. Maybe something quaint, even charming in the snow. It wasn't. It was hard and square and built for survival, not beauty. Rows of squat buildings lined a single wide path of packed earth and snow, with a church at one end and a blacksmith's fire smoking at the other. People didn't stop to wave. They didn't smile. They noticed. That was enough. Nora walked ahead of the sled, her heart thudding harder than her feet. Every step into town felt like dragging her old self behind her, the girl who'd always tried to disappear into corners, into oversized coats, into silence. But now Tala walked beside her. And that mattered. Inside the general store, it smelled of flour and kerosene. The floorboards creaked under Nora's boots as she stepped in snow trailing behind her. Two men near the back went quiet. A third, red-bearded arms crossed, just stared. No one spoke. Until, well, I'll be. Wasn't sure he still knew how to bring a lady into town. The voice came from behind the counter. A woman with gray-streaked auburn hair tied up in a messy knot, cheeks red from heat and pride both. "Maggie McCrae," Malachi said simply. Maggie smiled, eyes narrowing like she already had Nora figured out. "So you're the one setting off sparks at the Red Elk cabin." Nora flushed. "I'm just staying for now. It's temporary." "I never said it wasn't." Maggie reached under the counter and pulled out a pencil. "So what are you after?" Nora stepped forward and pulled out a small list she'd written on the back of a hymn sheet she found in the cabin. Salt, coffee, dried beans, soap, and if you have any fruit that hasn't turned to leather, that too. Maggie read the list, then looked up slowly. Her gaze wasn't unkind, but it was sharp like a blade she'd honed years ago and still knew how to use. "I heard some talk," she said. "Folks whisperin'," saying Malachi took in a stranger. Nora's heart dropped into her stomach. Heard she was big as a bear and twice as bold. Maggie continued smiling faintly. "Figured if that was true, I better meet her myself." "I didn't mean to stir anything." Maggie waved a hand. "Honey, you walk into a town like this with your head up, people'll whisper whether you're big, small, rich, or dyin'. Let 'em whisper." One of the men near the back grunted. "Your kind don't last long here." Nora turned to face him. "My kind. Big talk. Big shoes. Big trouble." Malachi took a step forward, but Maggie was faster. "Harland, you say one more word, and I'll tan your hide so red, you'll start praying for snow to cool it down." The man rolled his eyes but backed off. Nora stood still, face flushed but spine straight. Maggie looked at her again, then softer this time. "You staying long?" "I don't know," Nora said honestly. "I wasn't supposed to be here." "No one ever is," Maggie said, then added almost too quiet to hear. "But sometimes Flat Top gives you what you need, not what you wanted." Nora didn't respond. Her throat was too tight. Maggie returned with a small cloth bundle and leaned in, whispering, slipped in a bit of cinnamon and 2 apples from the back bin. "Merry Christmas." Nora swallowed hard. "I can't pay for—" "Didn't ask you to." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft but steady. Malachi loaded the sled while Tala played with a stick, drawing shapes in the thin white powder. As Nora stepped out of the store, she caught sight of something on the porch across the street, a woman in a high-collared coat pulling her son close. Her eyes locked with Nora's, then narrowed. She turned away. Judgment in every step. Nora wrapped her arms tighter around her coat. "They think I'm some scandal," she murmured as Malachi tied the sacks. "They don't know you," he said, tightening the rope. "That's the point. They don't want to." Malachi straightened. "They didn't want me either when I first came down from the mountains. Half Ute, half wrong, they said." She looked at him. "I stayed anyway," he added. "Built my own place. Raised my girl. Let 'em stare." Nora looked down at her boots at the snow beginning to crust to the toes. "Flat top eats the soft ones first," she said quietly. Malachi's expression didn't change, but his next words were steady. "Then don't be soft." On the way back, Tala fell asleep against Nora's side in the sled. Her small hand curled into Nora's coat, breathing slow and even. The road wound through pines weighed down by snow, the sky dimming with the promise of another storm. Nora didn't speak. She just ran her fingers through Tala's braid, her other hand clutching the cloth bag of food on her lap. Back at the cabin, as Malachi lit the lantern and shook snow from his coat, Nora unpacked their goods. She peeled one of Maggie's apples, sliced it thin, and set it on the stove with water and cinnamon. The scent filled the cabin, fast, warm, sweet, alive. Tala stirred from sleep, sat up, sniffed, and blinked slowly. "Smells like Christmas," Nora said, not expecting a reply. But Tala nodded. Just once. And that was enough. Tomorrow would bring something else. A smile. A spark. A change. The wind softened overnight, as if the storm had finally tired itself out. Morning came without fury, just a gentle fall of snowflakes dusting the cabin's porch. The world outside looked almost kind, again wrapped in white. Inside, the scent of cinnamon still lingered from the night before. Nora stood at the table, tearing thin strips of cloth from the lining of an old skirt she'd found folded in the bottom of a trunk. Red. Faded, but still red enough. She tied them carefully around a handful of pine branches she'd gathered behind the shed that morning, layering them into a crude garland. Tala sat beside her legs, swinging off the edge of the bench, chin tucked down as she watched. She hadn't spoken. Not yet. But she'd followed Nora from room to room all morning. She even handed her the scissors without being asked. That was something. "You ever made paper stars?" Nora asked, holding up one she'd folded from the corner of an old newspaper. Tala looked, then slowly nodded. Nora smiled. "My mama used to hang these from the rafters. Said they kept the dark away." Tala reached for the folded paper. Nora didn't say anything. Just slid over another square, let her small hands work. Across the room, Malachi stood sharpening a blade. His eyes kept flicking toward the table like he didn't mean to look, but couldn't help himself. He hadn't said much since they'd returned from town. But Nora had seen the tightness in his jaw when the townspeople stared, the way his shoulders squared when he saw the woman cross the street to avoid them. He had let her take the lead since then, Nora, with her paper stars and her apples, her humming and quiet fire tending. He hadn't stopped her. That was his way of saying yes. They spent the afternoon stringing pine and cloth around the window frames. Nora hummed as she worked, not songs with words, just melodies, the kind that filled the silence but didn't crowd it. Tala worked beside her. No instructions, no questions. But when she was done with each task, she looked up, waiting for the next. At one point, Nora made a joke about one of the branches looking like it had been run over by a moose in a hurry. It wasn't clever, but it made Tala's lips twitch. A ghost of a smile. Nora pretended not to notice. She just kept humming. Later, she stood at the stove frying thin apple slices in sugar and salt when Malachi came up behind her. He didn't speak, just leaned one arm against the wall, watching. "She's different," he said finally, voice quiet. Nora nodded. "She's trying. She hasn't smiled since the day her mama died." The words landed heavy. Nora turned to look at him. "I didn't know what to do with it," he said. Her silence, her fear. "I tried to pull her back, but the more I tried, the farther she went." "You didn't do anything wrong." "She was 4, he said almost to himself. "She saw the fever take her mother, watched her skin burn, then go cold. I sent her out to the woodshed when the time came. Thought I was sparing her." He looked down. "She came back in before I could cover the body." Nora swallowed, heart tight. "I thought the worst part was burying my wife," he said. "But the worst part was looking at Tala the next morning and knowing she was gone too. Not dead. Just somewhere else." Nora stepped closer. "You didn't lose her. Not fully. She never came back." "She's trying," Nora said again, firmer this time. "She's watching, listening. She's showing up." Malachi looked over at the girl, who now sat stringing red cloth to a crooked pine branch, like it was the most serious job in the world. "She smiled," he said, almost in disbelief. "Did you see it?" "I did." He rubbed a hand down his face. "God help me, I didn't think she ever would again." There was something raw in his voice, something that made Nora want to reach out. But she didn't. Not yet. That night they didn't talk much over dinner, but Tala ate everything on her plate, even licked a finger and ran it through the sugar at the bottom of her cup. She caught Nora watching and blinked in mock guilt. Nora raised her brows and whispered, "Reckless." And just like that, Tala grinned, a real smile, tooth and all. Malachi froze mid-bite. Nora didn't react, just passed her a cloth to wipe her hands. But her eyes glistened when they met Malachi's. After Tala went to her pallet and curled up with her doll, Nora lit the candle in the window again. Malachi stood beside her this time. "I used to think Christmas didn't matter anymore," he said. Nora looked out into the darkness. "It matters most when it's hardest to believe in." He studied her face. "You really believe that I have to," she whispered. "Otherwise I might stop trying." He nodded slowly. Later, when the fire was low and Nora had settled into the cot, she heard footsteps again. Softer this time, expectant. Tala didn't speak. She just curled up beside Nora's bed, same as before, doll in her arms, head near Nora's hand. Nora waited a moment, then reached down and ran her fingers gently through the child's hair. Tala let out a tiny sigh, the kind that only comes when a child feels safe. Outside, the wind began to stir again, but inside, something warm had taken root. Nora didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she wasn't invisible anymore, and neither was Tala. In the morning, they would rise early. The pantry was thinning again, and Nora had noticed a cracked window pane near the stove. She could fix it. She would ask Malachi if she could help him with the traps next time, because she wasn't just passing through anymore. She was building something, right here, on the wrong mountain, in the right place. The sun barely crested the ridge when Jonah Pike showed up. Nora was near the shed shaking out the wool blankets she'd washed in melted snow the day before. She spotted the man before he reached the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, with a crooked gait and a thick scarf pulled up to his eyes. His breath came in clouds. His coat looked older than he did. Malachi stepped out from the barn before Jonah reached the door. "You're early," Malachi said flatly. Jonah stopped, nodded. "Storm's coming." Malachi folded his arms. "You didn't come about the weather." Jonah's eyes cut toward the cabin where Nora had frozen with a half-folded blanket in her arms. "She's still here," he said. "Didn't think you'd keep her." Malachi didn't answer. "I heard what folks are saying. Maggie says she's got a good head on her. But others, not so kind." Nora stayed back. She didn't want to listen, but the wind carried every word clear, as if it had been meant for her. Jonah stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've got a woman in your cabin, Malachi folks. Think that means something." Malachi didn't flinch. "Let 'em think what they want. She ain't your wife." "She's not yours either," Malachi said, voice sharp enough to cut bark. That landed like a slap. Jonah looked away. "Is this about the girl?" he asked. "She's talking again. I heard. She's smiling too." Jonah paused. "And that's her doing?" Malachi nodded. Jonah let out a breath. "She's changing things in there." "She's helping," Malachi said. "That's what matters." Jonah's jaw clenched. "Doesn't change the way they look at it. I'm not asking their permission. You might have to, Mal. You know this town. You know how they are. A woman stays in your house too long, unmarried folks start telling stories that stick." Malachi stepped forward. "She's not some story." "I didn't say she was," Jonah said. "But the ones telling it don't care." They stood in silence. Two men who'd once hunted the same hills, buried the same kind of grief, fought the same war. Then Malachi said, quiet but firm, "She stays." Jonah nodded slowly. "All right." He turned to go, then paused, looking toward the window where Tala stood, watching through the glass. "She's not afraid of people anymore," he said. "No," Malachi replied. "Not since Nora." Jonah didn't say goodbye. That afternoon, Nora chopped root vegetables near the stove while Tala sat at the table cutting tiny paper trees. She'd gotten good at folding, quick, deliberate fingers. Nora liked to pretend she wasn't watching, but her eyes flicked up every few seconds, just to see. She heard the tension in Malachi's silence when he came back in. The way he dropped his coat a little too hard. The way he stared into the fire without blinking. "What is it?" she asked. Jonah came by. "And folks are talking." Nora stilled. "They think I'm using you," she said after a long pause. "That I forced my way in." "They think worse," he admitted. Nora nodded slowly, then turned back to the pot, stirring gently. "I've heard it before," she said. "Back home, in the mill town. They called me all sorts of things. Some of them weren't even lies, but most just didn't like the way I filled a room." She swallowed hard. "They think women like me don't belong. Not in church pews, not in shops. and especially not beside decent men. Malachi stood behind her now, unmoving. "You want me gone?" she asked without turning. "No." She closed her eyes for a second. "I can leave if it'll keep them off you." "No." His voice was deeper now, more certain. "You've brought light back to this place," he said. "I didn't even know how dark it had gotten till you showed up." She turned finally. "That's not enough to stop their mouths." "I'm not trying to stop them," he said. "Let them talk. It's not right," she whispered. "Me being here. Unmarried. People will think I don't care what they think." She blinked. "You saved my daughter," he said. "You made her laugh again. You made her look at the world instead of hiding from it. You kept our fire going, our food warm, our hands steady." He stepped forward, stopping just short of touching her. "You gave me back a home," he said, "and I won't send you away because of gossip." Nora's chest ached in the best and worst way all at once. "I don't know how to stay," she said. "Not for real. I've never been wanted long enough to learn." "Then learn here," he said. "With us." From the corner, a quiet voice broke the stillness. "Don't go." Both of them turned. Tala stood beside the table, one paper tree clutched in her hand. It was the first full sentence she'd spoken all day. Nora knelt slowly. "I'm not going. Not tonight." Tala stepped forward and tucked the paper tree into Nora's coat pocket. Malachi watched them, his eyes bright. Later that night, after Tala was asleep, and the wind returned to scratch at the eaves, Malachi brought out a worn box. He opened it beside the fire and pulled out an old string of carved wooden animals, elk bears, birds, primitive and beautiful. "I made these for her first Christmas," he said. "Tala hung them above her crib." He held one out, a small fox with a broken tail. She liked this one best. Nora took it gently, smiling. "You could hang them again," she said. Malachi looked at the mantle. "Maybe I will." As she reached to hand it back, his fingers brushed hers. Not a mistake. Not accidental. Just a touch. She held her breath. Tomorrow someone else would come. Someone with questions. Someone with judgment. And the storm they were about to face wouldn't come from the sky. It would come from the past. Snow fell in thick sheets the next morning, wet, heavy flakes that clung to the roof and hushed the entire mountain. Nora had just started to sweep near the hearth when the knock came. It wasn't the kind of knock a neighbor gave. It was sharp, measured, official. Malachi froze where he stood halfway through, splitting a block of pine. His hand dropped slowly from the axe handle. Tala, seated near the stove, tracing stars in the frost on the window, looked up, her little body tensing, as if she knew something had shifted in the air. Nora stood very still. Malachi crossed the room without a word and opened the door. 3 people stood outside. The sheriff in his brown coat with the badge dulled from years of wind and grit. Behind him, a man in a fine coat and slick hat that had no business in mountain snow. And next to him, a woman wrapped in furs, her mouth twisted like something sour lived there permanently. Nora's breath stopped in her chest. The Harringtons. She recognized them instantly, though she'd only seen them once back in the city. They hadn't even looked at her properly when she interviewed. Only nodded while their steward handed her a contract and $2 silver. Her stomach dropped. "There she is," Mrs. Harrington snapped, stepping forward without waiting for permission. "That's the woman who stole from us." Nora opened her mouth. I didn't. You took our money, disappeared, and now we find you shacked up with a man in the middle of nowhere." The sheriff raised a hand. Let's all stay calm now. Mr. Harrington stepped forward. Miss Sullivan, if that's even your real name, never showed up to Pine Hollow. We gave her funds in advance for travel and holiday service. We assumed she'd been waylaid. Then we heard rumors about a woman matching her description holed up in a mountain shack with a child and a trapper. His words sliced like a blade, cold and practiced. Malachi stood solid in the doorway. She got off at the wrong stop. That's all. How convenient, Mrs. Harrington hissed. Spare me the romance. Look at her. Did you really think someone like her was fit to serve in our house? The words hit like ice water. Nora felt them in her spine and her throat. She tried to speak, but nothing came. Where's the money? Mr. Harrington demanded. I didn't steal anything, she managed. I was on the train. I fell asleep. Save it, the woman snapped. You conned us. With your sweet letters, your pitiful handwriting, your stories about needing work. Then you vanished. I tried to get there, Nora said, voice shaking. I got off at Flat Top by mistake. There were no trains. Oh, please, Mrs. Harrington scoffed. A likely story from a woman who's clearly made herself comfortable here. Nora flinched. She's not a thief, Malachi said, voice like thunder. The sheriff stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Red Elk! Until we get this sorted, I'm going to need to take her into town. No, Malachi said. Tala's small voice pierced the room. No. Everyone turned. The child stood by the hearth, fists clenched at her sides, eyes shining. She didn't steal, she said louder now. She made me soup. She gave me songs. Nora knelt, shaking. It's all right, sweetheart. Tala ran to her, burying her face in Nora's coat. Don't go. The sheriff's face softened, but he shook his head. It's procedure. Mrs. Harrington's voice sliced through again. Let's be honest here. You really think a woman like that was ever going to serve in our household? Malachi stepped between them. You don't get to speak to her like that. Oh, how noble, Mrs. Harrington sneered. Defending the poor fat girl who tricked you with sob stories. That word fat landed harder than any accusation. It wasn't new. But coming from a voice like that in front of a child, in a home that had finally felt safe, it shattered something. Nora stood slowly. Her body trembled, but her voice came clear. You know what? Keep the money, she said. Keep your gossip. Keep your town. Then she grabbed her coat, her carpet bag, and pushed past everyone on the porch. Malachi reached for her, Nora. But she was already moving. She walked fast, boots sinking deep in the snow, breath coming too hard. The storm stung her cheeks, but she didn't stop. Not when she reached the edge of the trees. Not when her foot slipped on a patch of hidden ice. Not even when the cold sliced through her like glass. She had to get out. She couldn't ruin their lives, too. Because that's what people like her did, didn't they? They brought shame. They brought rumors. They didn't fit into fine houses or quiet mountain homes. She reached the bench at the station, half buried in snow, and sat, alone, again, just like the day she'd arrived. She pressed a gloved hand to her lips, willing herself not to sob. The wind didn't care. The town didn't care. And maybe Malachi had only been kind out of pity. Maybe even Tala would forget her by spring. Behind her the woods whispered and cracked, but no footsteps came. She was alone. She stayed there until night fell, until the snow began to crust over her boots, until the warmth from the cabin was nothing but a memory. Tomorrow she'd catch the freight train, head anywhere else. Because whatever had started in that cabin, it couldn't survive out here. Not with the world watching. Not with shame clinging to her like another layer of frost. Somewhere far behind her, a candle still burned in the window. But Nora didn't turn to look. She couldn't bear to see it. Not tonight. The snow was crusted hard by morning, glazed in ice that cracked beneath each step. The wind had died, but the cold had grown sharper, clean, and punishing. Nora sat on the same bench where it had all started, hunched over her carpet bag, the thin wool of her coat doing little to fight off the chill seeping into her bones. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just closed her eyes and drifted in and out, shivering under the overhang of the station roof as the dark hours stretched endlessly across the sky. No trains had come. The rails were buried, forgotten under winter's weight. But she knew one would come eventually, and when it did, she'd get on it. Any direction would do. Her fingers were stiff with cold, tucked into the crooks of her elbows. Her cheeks burned from the wind, but none of it hurt quite like the ache in her chest. The things they said, the way they looked at her. Like she was filth, like she'd tricked her way into warmth, into kindness, into belonging. She stared down at the frozen ground, blinking against the tears she hadn't let fall last night. She'd thought for the first time in years maybe she could have a place. Not a borrowed corner of someone else's life, but a real place. A home. A family. She'd been foolish to believe it. Then footsteps, heavy, purposeful, crunching toward her. She turned her head slowly. Malachi stood at the edge of the platform, snow dusted on his shoulders, breath fogging around his face. His coat hung open, his boots soaked from the long walk. In his arms, wrapped in a thick blanket, was Tala. Nora's breath caught. He said nothing for a long second, just stared at her like he couldn't believe she was real, like he'd had to see her himself to believe she was still here. Then finally, soft hoarse, he said, "Don't go." Nora shook her head. "I have to. Your name's already ruined. The town thinks I don't care what the town thinks." He crossed the platform in 3 strides, setting Tala down gently. The little girl turned and ran to Nora, flinging her arms around her waist, burying her face in Nora's coat. "Would you leave me too?" Tala whispered. "Like Mama did." The words hit like a stone straight to the heart. Nora dropped to her knees in the snow, wrapping Tala up tight. Her voice broke. "Sweetheart, your Mama didn't want to leave you. She loved you." "Do ya?" Tala asked, muffled against her chest. Nora blinked, stunned. "Yes," she whispered. "I love you." "Then don't go." Nora held her tighter, unable to stop the tears this time. They slid down her cheeks, hot and relentless, blurring the edges of everything. She looked up at Malachi. "I never meant to bring trouble. I never meant to take anything." "You didn't," he said, kneeling beside them. You gave us everything we forgot how to want." She shook her head. "They won't stop talking. They'll make it harder for you. For her." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Nora blinked at it. "I found this in the barn," he said. "Tucked in your bag. You must have dropped it when you unpacked." "Didn't notice." He unfolded the scrap and held it up. Her ticket stub, clear as day. Pine Hollow, December 23rd. Nora stared. Her mouth fell open. I thought I'd lost it." "The station master recognized it," Malachi said. "He remembered you crying, checking your ticket, saying it wasn't right. He didn't say anything then, but he should have. He came to the house this morning, said he was sorry." Nora sat back, stunned. She took the paper in trembling hands. "Proof," She had told the truth. Malachi's eyes never left hers. "We're going to town. Today." Her eyes widened. "What? Why?" "Because I'm not going to let them run you off with lies and shame," he said. "Not when we both know what's true." "I don't need the town to like me," she said softly. "No," he agreed, "but you deserve to be defended." He stood lifted Tala again, held out a hand. "Come home, Nora." She stared at him, at the man who had given her shelter when she had nothing but cold and a broken spirit. Then she looked at the child in his arms, whose eyes, so often downcast, now glowed with hope. Nora stood slowly and took his hand. The walk back was quiet. Snow fell again, thin and slow, like it was reconsidering its fury. Nora held the ticket stub in her glove fingers, curling around it, like it was a lifeline. When they reached the cabin, the hearth was still warm, the candle still burning in the window. She stepped inside and looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. The pine garland she'd made with Tala still hung above the window. The folded paper stars still lined the mantel. She had thought it was a temporary shelter. It had become a home. Malachi opened the trunk near the fire and pulled out a carved wooden star. "I made this," he said quietly, "for a tree I never got around to putting up." He handed it to her. 5 perfect points, smoothed edges, sanded with care. "For you," he said. Nora's throat ached with all the words she couldn't say. Later, as they prepared to leave for town, she tucked the ticket stub into her pocket and wrapped Tala in another scarf. Malachi hitched up the sled. The sky was heavy again, the road slick, but their direction was clear. They would ride into the heart of Flat Top and stand in front of everyone, Maggie, Jonah, the sheriff, and the Harringtons, and speak the truth. Not just for Nora, for all the women like her who had been made to feel small, for every little girl who deserved to believe in people again, and for the quiet man who had chosen love over reputation. Because the next storm wasn't weather, it was justice, and it was coming. The town of Flat Top didn't look like much from the trail, but today it loomed like a test. The sled wheels groaned under packed snow as Malachi steered it through the main road. Nora sat beside him, spine straight, her hands wrapped around Tala's tiny frame. The child sat between them, bundled in thick wool, and silence, her eyes darting from one building to the next. Nora's breath plumed like smoke in the air, and her heart thudded with the beat of someone walking toward judgment. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what came next, if she had the right to stay, to build something, to matter. Malachi didn't speak, but his jaw was tight. His eyes were locked ahead, burning with quiet resolve. The kind of fire that didn't flicker when wind came. The kind that stayed lit through storms. The general store came into view first. Then the church. Then Maggie McCrae standing on the wooden porch with a bucket of salt in one hand and a pistol of a gaze in the other. Nora felt her shoulders tighten. "She saw us," she whispered. "Good," Malachi replied. "She's the only one with a sharper tongue than a sheriff." They came to a stop in front of the church, where a group had already gathered. Word had spread fast. Nora could see Jonah Pike near the steps, arms folded. The sheriff stood nearby, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. And next to him, Mrs. Harrington draped in a new fur, lips drawn in a tight little sneer. "She really brought the whole circus," Malachi muttered. Nora helped Tala down from the sled and straightened her coat. She almost didn't step forward. She almost let fear win. But then she remembered Tala's voice from the night before, small and breaking, "Do you love me?" And she had said yes. So she walked. Malachi followed. The crowd quieted as they reached the base of the church steps. Mrs. Harrington stepped forward first, chin high. You again. I thought you'd have the dignity to disappear. Nora looked her in the eye. I'm not disappearing. Well, the sheriff's already aware of your theft. It wasn't theft, Nora said, pulling the folded ticket stub from her coat. I had every intention of coming to Pine Hollow. I boarded the right train. I fell asleep and got off at the wrong stop. Your money was still in my bag until I used it to survive. Survive, Mrs. Harrington laughed bitterly. You looked quite cozy up there with your trapper and that child. Malachi stepped forward then. Careful what you say. Mrs. Harrington turned her sneer on him. Oh, I see now. This isn't about justice, it's about romance. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Nora could feel eyes pressing into her, measuring her worth, her size, her past. She raised her voice. I've been poor. I've been laughed at. I've been overlooked. But I never lied about who I was. I was just trying to get to a job. You gave me an address, a promise, and then you turned me into a villain when the train tracks betrayed me. You took what wasn't yours, Mr. Harrington snapped. I earned what you gave me, she said. Every letter I wrote, every reference I shared, I meant it. I came with hope. You call me a thief, but what you really mean is, how dare someone like me believe she deserved a place in your world? A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone coughed. Maggie McCrae took a step forward, hands on her hips. She's right. Mrs. Harrington whirled. Excuse me, Maggie pointed. I said she's right. She's been in my store. She didn't steal a damn thing. She helped that little girl start talking again. She brought warmth back to a cabin that's been cold since Malachi's wife died. She's unfit, no. Jonah Pike said, his voice cutting clean through the rising tension. You're unfit, madam. All eyes turned to him. She got off at the wrong station, same as any of us might have. And instead of begging, she got to work. Cleaned, cooked, fixed things, loved that child like her own. The sheriff cleared his throat, looking at Nora. Is that ticket real? She held it out. It's yours to verify. He took it, unfolded it slowly, looked up. This checks out. The date, the seal. This says Pine Hollow. Mrs. Harrington scoffed. So what? She still took our money. She spent it to live, the sheriff said evenly. And from what I'm hearing, she didn't hide. She's been right here working, not stealing. Maggie stepped forward again. What you really hate is that she didn't beg for your approval. She made her own place. And it wasn't in your big cold house, it was in a warm mountain cabin with a man and child who needed her. Tala, who had been standing behind Nora this whole time, stepped forward now. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out one of her folded paper stars and handed it to Mrs. Harrington. The woman stared at it confused. Then Tala whispered, You need it more than we do. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was holy. Mrs. Harrington's face went red, but she said nothing. She turned and left without another word, her husband scrambling to follow. The sheriff handed the ticket back to Nora. I'll mark this case closed. Jonah tipped his hat. Glad that's over. Maggie smiled. You know the way to the store when you're ready for more sugar, sweetheart. Nora nodded, stunned. Her eyes stung from more than the wind. She turned to Malachi. I thought I'd be run out of town. You almost were, he said. But you stood your ground. She swallowed, heart pounding. That means something, doesn't it? It means everything he said. You didn't just stay. You claimed something. She looked down at Tala, who clutched her hand now with quiet pride. For the first time in her life, Nora didn't feel like she was borrowing space. She felt like she belonged. Tomorrow would come with new questions, sure, about what they were, what came next. But for now, she held her head high, her hand warm in a child's, and her heart steady beside a man who hadn't let her walk away. And that was more than she'd ever thought she'd have. The storm was over, but winter wasn't done just yet. The road back from town was quieter than Nora expected. No triumphant cheers, no tears either. Just snow, soft and steady again, falling in thin silver threads across the open sky. The sled wheels crunched with each turn, and Malachi's gloved hands held the reins with a calm she couldn't quite match yet. Tala had fallen asleep in Nora's lap not long after they left Flat Top. Her small hands were curled around the edge of Nora's coat head, pressed into her ribs, like she belonged there, like she knew it. And maybe she did. Nora brushed a strand of hair from the child's face and looked up at the man beside her. He hadn't said much since the confrontation, just small things, instructions, quiet reassurances. But his presence spoke more than words. Solid, steady, unshaken by the storm they'd just passed through. She didn't know how to ask what came next, not without ruining the stillness between them. So she waited. When they reached the cabin, the front door stuck in the snow. Malachi gave it a hard shove with his shoulder, and the hinges groaned open like a beast waking from hibernation. Inside, the warmth still lingered in the stones. The fire had long gone out, but the air didn't feel cold. Just waiting. Tala stirred, rubbing her eyes. Home, she asked, voice fuzzy with sleep. Nora nodded. Yes, baby. We're home. Malachi shot her a quick glance but didn't correct the word. He simply stepped past and began stacking fresh logs into the hearth. Nora carried Tala to her cot and tucked her in. When she stood again, the child reached out and caught her hand. You came back. Nora's throat tightened. I told you I would. That night the wind was silent. Even the trees outside seemed to rest. They sat across from each other after supper, 2 mugs of pine tea warming their hands. Nora could feel him watching her, though she didn't raise her eyes. He said her name first, soft but sure. Nora. She looked up. I know this isn't how you pictured your life. Not here. Not like this. She smiled faintly. You're right. I never imagined I'd be the fat woman who ended up snowed in on a mountain with a trapper and a half-wild child. His brow twitched. You're not fat. You're... She laughed. Please don't try to come up with a euphemism. He didn't. Instead, he said, you're the first person who's told Tala she's brave, who treated her like she wasn't broken. Nora's eyes flicked to the window. Snow curled at the edges of the glass. You saved her, he said. You saved me. She swallowed hard. Don't put me on a pedestal. I'm just someone who was too stubborn to leave. No, he said. You stayed even when the world tried to shame you into running. She looked at him, really looked. Why did you come after me? His answer came without hesitation. Because I didn't want you to think silence meant indifference. I wanted you to know I saw you. All of you. She blinked. That was the difference. She'd lived a whole life being looked at without ever being seen. And this man, this rough, calloused, stubborn man, had looked at her like she was a sunrise. I've never belonged anywhere, she whispered. I've always been temporary. Malachi set his mug down. You're not temporary here. She felt the words hit deep in her chest, like roots pushing through hard ground. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. With children, With all of this, I don't either, he said. But I think we could figure it out together. She gave a small, breathless laugh. You offering me a job? I'm offering you a place at my table. She stared at him, heart pounding. You sure? She asked. The town won't stay quiet for long. Let them talk. And your pride, he leaned forward. I'll trade it for peace. She didn't answer, just nodded slowly, then got up and stoked the fire. The next morning came pale and blue. The storm had passed, but it left behind a world soft with white and sky. Nora woke early and stepped outside to gather water. The cold bit at her nose, but the air smelled clean. At the base of the porch steps, she found something she hadn't expected. Footprints. Fresh ones. Not animal. Boots. She bent down, studying them. They led around the back of the cabin, careful, deliberate. Someone had circled the house. Her breath fogged. She turned quickly, rushing back inside. Malachi. He was already pulling on his coat. He must have seen them too. They moved in sync, checking windows, latching doors. Not panicked, but wary. Could be a hunter, he said. Or someone from town, she said. No one walks up here this early unless they're desperate. Or angry. The peace from the night before cracked like a thin sheet of ice underfoot. She looked at him. You think this is over? He shook his head. No, I think someone didn't like what happened in town yesterday. She gritted her teeth. So they came up here to what, scare us, maybe. Or worse. He looked at her steady and firm. We'll handle it. Together. She nodded, but her stomach twisted. I'll keep Tala close today, she said. I'll check the traps. Leave my rifle loaded. As he stepped outside, she watched him disappear into the trees. The silence that returned wasn't peaceful anymore. It was waiting for something. She went to Tala's cot and pulled the child close, wrapping an extra blanket around her. Tala stirred but didn't wake. Nora sat there, brushing her fingers through the girl's hair, her heart heavy with a new kind of fear. Yesterday, they had fought for dignity. But tomorrow, they might have to fight for safety. The knock didn't come until just before dusk. Nora had been stirring the stew, heart racing, with every shadow that passed the window. Tala was coloring quietly on the floor, her boots kicked off, legs curled beneath her like a kitten. Malachi hadn't returned from checking the trap lines yet, and the sun was starting to dip low, too low for comfort. When the knock finally came, it wasn't hard or loud. Just 3 measured taps, like someone trying to sound polite but not fooling anyone. Nora froze, wooden spoon still in hand. Her pulse jumped in her throat. She stood, slowly wiped her hands, and glanced at the rifle leaning near the doorway. Her fingers hovered over it. Another knock. Firmer this time. Tala looked up. Mama Nora hesitated, then stepped toward the door, keeping herself half hidden behind it as she opened it just a crack. A man stood outside. Not a stranger. It was Reverend Breyer, tall, pale, with gloves too clean for any real work, and a Bible tucked under one arm like a badge of office. He smiled, but not kindly. Miss Sullivan, he said smoothly. May I come in? Nora tightened her grip on the doorframe. Malachi's not here. Not here for him, the Reverend said. I came to speak with you. She eyed the sled behind him. Empty. She didn't move. I understand you made quite the scene in town, he continued, voice syrupy, accusing a God-fearing woman of prejudice, twisting a simple misunderstanding into martyrdom. Nora felt heat rise in her chest. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was slander. The Reverend raised a brow. Is that what you call it now, biting truth? She didn't answer. He leaned in slightly, voice lowering. There are those in Flat Top who think your presence here is a stain. An unmarried woman living with a man and child. Rumors travel fast. Morality doesn't always wait for facts. You should leave, she said. This isn't your home. I came to offer a solution. She narrowed her eyes. He opened his Bible and pulled out a folded piece of paper from between the pages, held it up. A position in Breckenridge, church charity post. Room and board included. You'd be among women again. Safe. Watched over. Her stomach twisted. You mean controlled? I mean saved, he said. You can't expect to build a future on sin. Nora stepped out now fully between him and the cabin door. You're not here to help me. You're here to remove me. He didn't deny it. You have a gift for stirring unrest. Weak men get confused. Children, too. The town will settle faster once you're gone. Her jaw clenched. You want me to give up my life, this home, because your pride was bruised? No. Because your presence endangers the peace. She stared at him, something ancient rising in her chest. The years of shame. The weight of labels. The bruises nobody saw. I spent my life apologizing for taking up space, she said. For being too loud, too soft, too heavy, too real. But I'm done shrinking. His face darkened. And if you think you can come here and twist God's word into chains, you can take your offer and burn it in your righteous little fireplace. Breyer stepped back, the false warmth gone from his face now. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe she said. But not tonight. And she closed the door in his face. Inside, Tala was watching. Nora took a breath and sank down next to her. Who was that? Tala asked. Someone who doesn't know how to mind his own business. Tala tilted her head. Are we still safe? Nora looked toward the window. The Reverend's sled was already disappearing into the trees, pulled by a thin gray horse. We are now, she whispered. A few minutes later, Malachi returned, snow on his shoulders and rifle in hand. He saw her face before she said anything. Who came, Reverend Breyer? His expression didn't change, but the stillness in his body deepened. What did he want to remove me? Offered me a place somewhere else. Church run. Cold as the grave, probably. And you, I told him to leave. He nodded, once proud. She stood and walked to him, rested a hand lightly against his chest. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Even if the whole damn town shows up with torches. He covered her hand with his own. I'd put out every one. Later that night, after Tala was asleep, they sat on the porch in silence. The wind had calmed again, but the stars were out bright and sharp as glass. Malachi lit a pipe and offered her the first puff. She waved it off, smiling. I was scared, she admitted. I wasn't. She raised an eyebrow. He looked over. Because I knew you'd choose to stay. She leaned her shoulder against his. How? Because you're not just brave, you're stubborn. They sat there like that for a while, and then she said it, the words quiet but deliberate. You asked me once what I wanted. He didn't move. She looked up. I want this. I want us. His eyes flicked toward hers. And you, I want you here, he said. Every day. Her throat tightened. But it can't stay like this, he added. Not halfway, not hiding from what it really is. She nodded. I know. We'll face them all, Nora. But not as scandal. Not as rumor. Then how? He turned fully to her, with a vow. The silence that followed wasn't uncertain, it was full. A decision had been made. Together they would claim what was already theirs. But first, they would need the town to see it. Not as shame, but as truth. As a beginning. Because nothing was more dangerous than a woman who had stopped apologizing for who she was. And nothing more sacred than the place she chose to stay. The snow fell softly the morning they walked into town, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Nora wore the green wool dress Maggie had altered for her, the sleeves snug, the waist fitted just enough to feel new. Not like a disguise, like a declaration. She had pinned her hair up and tied a velvet ribbon at her neck, one Tala had chosen from a box of odds and ends. The child walked proudly beside her, wearing a tiny white shawl Malachi had stitched himself. Malachi walked on Nora's other side. His jacket brushed clean boots, polished with bare fat hair, pulled back with a leather tie. He didn't wear a hat today. He wanted them to see his face. Let them all see. Flat Top wasn't crowded that morning, but word had spread. People leaned on porch railings, loitered in doorways. No one said much, but no one turned away either. Maggie was waiting near the chapel doors. She gave Nora a slow, proud smile and held her arm out as if to say, "You ready, sweetheart? No words needed." Nora nodded. The chapel wasn't grand. Bare wooden benches, a few wildflowers in chipped vases, but it was full. Even Jonah Pike had shown up, boots still muddy, hat in his lap. At the front stood Reverend Willoughby, a younger man from Silver Creek, who'd volunteered to officiate after Briar's departure. No one had seen the old Reverend in days. Rumor had it he'd taken a long vacation down south. Nora didn't ask. She stood across from Malachi, fingers laced tightly with his tala just behind them, holding a ring tied to a pine branch. The vows were simple, nothing scripted, just truth. Malachi's voice was low but strong. You found me at the edge of myself. You stayed when I gave you every reason not to. You taught me love wasn't loud, it was steady. I choose you, Nora Sullivan, every day, every storm. Nora blinked back tears. You didn't see me as someone broken. You saw me as someone worth fighting for. I choose you, Malachi Red Elk. I choose this life, this family, this mountain. A hush settled when the ring slid into place. Then the kiss. It wasn't timid. It was acclaiming. A promise sealed not just with lips, but with the weight of everything they'd survived to stand here now. The room erupted in quiet applause. Maggie wiped a tear with the back of her hand. Jonah actually grinned. Tala ran forward and wrapped her arms around both of them. Now we're real, she whispered. Nora held her tight. We always were. Later, the townsfolk gathered outside with mugs of cider and spiced bread. Someone brought out a fiddle. Someone else found a drum. And under the soft gray sky, people danced not wildly, but with warmth. Malachi and Nora stood side by side watching Tala spin in a circle, laughing with another girl from town. Nora leaned into his side. You were right, she said, about what I wasn't meant to disappear. No, he said. You were meant to root and grow. She thought about that as the snow began to fall again, gentle as lace. The world had always told her to shrink, to apologize for her size, her voice, her wants. But on this mountain, in this strange and stubborn town, she'd found something rare, space. Not given, taken. And in that space she'd built a life. The next few weeks passed quietly, but not without rhythm. Nora spent her days baking bread, tending the hens, mending shirts. Malachi taught Tala how to whittle and trap, and every night they sat together by the fire, the three of them reading stories aloud from a book with worn pages. Jonah dropped by sometimes with venison. Maggie came up with yarn and gossip. Even old Sheriff Dobbins made the climb once, muttering something about checking on stability in the hills. But he stayed for stew and took seconds. The mountain had begun to soften toward her. Not just the trees and trails, but the people. She'd earned them. Not because she'd begged, but because she'd stood her ground. In early spring, a woman from town, Mrs. Delaney, came knocking, cheeks red, hands full of dried herbs. She'd come to ask if Nora might consider starting a proper kitchen garden in town. Maybe even teach some of the other girls how to make soap and can peaches. Nora said yes. By summer, the garden was blooming, and so was everything else. At night, she and Malachi sat on the porch, Tala asleep inside the stars, wide and generous above them. One night after the fireflies had quieted, Malachi turned to her. "You still think you're just a girl who got off at the wrong stop?" She laughed softly. "No. I think I was always supposed to miss that train." "Why?" "'Cause I would have spent my whole life trying to be small enough for a world that never made room for me. But this place, this life, you and Tala, you didn't ask me to be smaller. You just made space for me as I was." He reached for her hand, and she gave it freely. Sometimes, she said, getting lost is the only way to be found. That was the real ending. Not the wedding, not the vindication, but the choice to stay, to grow, to be seen fully, to love without shrinking. That was what Nora Sullivan had built on a mountain, with snow in its bones and fire in its heart. Not just a home, a truth, and it would outlast every storm.